Hey folks, this lecture we're talking about several different moral panics. The 1980s, much like today, I'm recording this in 2023, was a time where older Americans, parents, lots and lots of people were just freaked out about so many things in American culture, and so they were going to lash out about it. And so we're going to cover several different moral panics along the way. Um, Now, from the Reagan administration, one of their big things was concerns about pornography. The Reagan administration, Reagan's elected in 1982. Back in the 1970s, Congress sponsored an academic study of pornography. The big thing that they were looking into was, is porn harmful and does porn cause violence? They had a lot of actual academics on board looking into this in a serious way. And that study that was conducted in the 1970s concluded that there are no ill effects from mainstream pornography. There are some genres of pornography that are very, very disturbing, and that do sort of take you down a kind of a bad road, possibly. But as far as mainstream, just, you know, a couple of people being intimate with each other, this study concluded that there's no harm, there's no ill effects of adults watching that kind of material, seeing that kind of material. Congress very much was not in favor of that study and objected, and surely pornography must be bad. And so in 1986, during the Reagan administration, Ronald Reagan charged a committee called the Meese Committee. And this is a picture of Ronald Reagan in the dark suit. The guy standing behind him in the kind of a, I don't know, medium gray suit is Edwin Meese. Meese is going to lead this committee, and I can't do a Ronald Reagan imitation. I've really, really tried. I just can't pull it off. He's got this really kind of breathy kind of a voice, and it just doesn't work for me. So, translates this into your head in a Ronald Reagan voice, but basically Reagan charges the Meese Commission. Last time we, the government, wanted you folks to kind of figure out that porn was bad. They didn't come to the correct conclusion. And so if you have to guess, what kind of conclusion would you think that we want this time? And so the Meese Commission meets, they study a lot of pornography, and they find that absolutely, indeed, the thing that Ronald Reagan wanted us to conclude, porn is absolutely harmful. And this study, the Meese Commission study, is objected to by, not surprisingly, the pornography industry, because it's their industry, but also academics. Academics are like, hey, mainstream porn with just a couple of people being intimate with each other, and I'm using intimacy in the, kind of a very vague sense of the word, but just a couple of people being intimate with each other, absolutely not harmful. Yes, there are some sort of subgenres, I guess, of pornography that, no, that's not good, but most mainstream porn, not. And so academics as well as the pornography industry object to this. But there's a government funded study on this. The Meese Commission has concluded that pornography is harmful. And so there's a lot of restrictions that pop up on pornography. Now, this is 1986. A few short years later, in the early 90s, the internet becomes widely available to the American public. And so you just kind of have pornography everywhere on the internet, and there's no issue there. But in the late 80s, there were a lot of restrictions on pornography because you could only buy, basically your access routes to porn were print magazines or videotapes. You know, you could go to the video store and rent porn videos, or you could go to, there were some movie theaters that were porn movie theaters. So these things all got kind of clamped down on. Also at the time, and this is kind of interesting in that it's funny to think about. Also at the time, when you do have a lot of laws that are restricting access to pornography, those are all, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are challenged in the courts because these laws are saying that obscene material should not be available. Well, what is your, version of obscene? What is your definition of obscene? Your definition of obscene is probably different than mine, right? And it's really, really hard to come up with a sound definition on what the heck obscenity even means. And so the court concludes kind of loosely that as far as obscenity, I know it when I see it. They can't really define it, but they can look at something and say, well, that's obscene, and look at something else, and that's not quite obscene. And so, since that's the conclusion that the Supreme Court reaches, the Supreme Court, the justices on the Supreme Court actually have to view pornography to judge whether or not it's obscene. And so for several of these cases, the Supreme Court justices in the late 1980s have to screen several pornography movies in the basement of the Supreme Court building. And this is a very odd thing to think about. The justices of the Supreme Court are all going down to the basement of the Supreme Court building together and watch porn. Apparently, from the mentions of it in documents that I've seen, these were incredibly popular. Several sources said that you have to get there early to get a good seat, because not only are the justices going, all of the clerks in the Supreme Court building, as well as just other people that work in the Supreme Court building, are all, funneling down there to the basement to watch porn as part of their workday. Not sure if this next part is true or not. It's one of those possibly, maybe is the case. But one of the justices on the court at the time was Justice Blackmun, and he was older and starting to develop vision trouble. And so he got a seat in the front row to make sure that he could see everything. And even more disturbing, that's not really that disturbing, but kind of more disturbing, he had a clerk sit next to him and narrate everything that's going on the screen. So that's just kind of in your head. That's kind of a disturbing thought that you've got to go and narrate to an elderly Supreme Court justice what's going on the screen. So the Meese Commission. The next stuff that we're going to talk about, we're about to talk about an issue of suicide. We are also about to talk about allegations of child abuse, possibly. Please, if you're feeling, kind of in a bad way, if you're having negative thoughts or something like that, and you're considering self-harm, please call 988. Don't just sit there with that. It's a temporary problem. I've been in a bad situation before, and those thoughts were in my head. Don't do that. Go and talk to somebody. Reach out to somebody, please. That's it. Most everything that you are ever going to go through is a temporary problem. It's temporary. It may be really, really bad and really, really terrible for right now, but that will conclude. That situation will end, and you can move past it. You can change your circumstances, and it may seem like you can't, but you definitely can. So So don't make a permanent decision on a temporary problem. Do that for me, okay? So so that's it. With the big disclaimer out of the way. Uh, in the 1980s, um, Dungeons and Dragons started getting really, really big. It's huge today, 2023, really because of the pandemic. The pandemic really saw this big monster explosion of interest in Dungeons and Dragons from players as well as spectators. That's kind of a new thing. They're because of YouTube channels like the big ones, Critical Role, and some other things, and lots of podcasts and stuff. During the pandemic, spectating Dungeons and Dragons sort of became a thing, and that's not something I had ever really considered or thought about or anything. But during the 1980s, playing Dungeons and Dragons became a big thing. Dungeons and Dragons got a lot of attention. It had been around much earlier, but the game got a lot of attention in the 1980s. And there were a lot of concerns. There were some allegations against Dungeons and Dragons in the 1980s. Several evangelical Christian groups started attacking the game Dungeons and Dragons, saying it was satanic, leading to to teen suicides and stuff. Um, I've never seen this book, The Devil's Web, Who is Stalking Your Children from Satan. But Pat Pulling, the one of the central figures of this next story, really plays into this story. She wrote that in '89. But and here's the suicidal issue. In 1982, June the 9th of 1982, Irving Pulling is Pat Pulling's son. Irving was 16 years old. He was a junior in high school. His parents went out for the night. As they pulled back up to the house after having sort of a parent date night, they saw their son lying dead on the grass. He had shot himself through the heart, and he had used her .38 caliber pistol that she had. I think it was a pistol that she had in her bedside table. I'm not sure where it was, but I do know it was hers. He had left 6 letters, some of them addressed to friends. One was to a teacher, and one of them was to his parents. And immediately they called the police upon seeing him out in the yard. And one of the cops that was there was an investigator. And he said, quote, "Mrs. Pulling, are you or your husband devil worshippers?" Was the question that this dude asked a parent that had just encountered her dead child. That was absolutely heartless and not appropriate in the slightest. She replied, absolutely not. And they had went up and found the letters that he had left. And in one of the letters, her son, Irving, whose nickname was Bink, and so sometimes in my notes, he's referred to as Bink, he confessed that he had felt that he was becoming evil, sort of antichrist evil, which is possibly where that cop got the devil worshipy thing. And the late 80s, man, or this is early 80s, allegations and fears of devil worship were just everywhere. It was a weird thing that everybody thought that there were just devil worshipers everywhere. I don't know why, but that was the environment I grew up in. Lots of people thinking there were devil worshipers. But anyway, so her son confessed in one of the letters that he was feeling like he was becoming more and more evil. Big thing, 16 years old. He said he started hearing voices. He was being told to commit murder by those voices, and he was choosing to end his own life instead of obeying those voices that he was listening to. Now, a lot of people beat up on Pat Pulling because of the road that she's about to go down, but I think we also need to take a step back. And she's a parent. She's just lost her kid to suicide, and she's looking for something that might have led to that. And again, I don't agree with where she's about to go in this story, but kind of think about this from her perspective a little bit. That she's just lost her son to suicide, and she's like, what the heck? Well, I did not see that coming at all. And she needs, to know what happened, what caused her son to make that choice. She did, like I said, she didn't see that side of him. And so she's going through his room, and she finds some violent, sadistic poems among his papers. She also sent her a picture there. She finds some books with demons on the covers, titles like The Dungeon Master's Guide. And if you don't know what the Dungeon Master's Guide is, you just kind of look at that. You're like, whoa, that seems kind of creepy, and it's got a demon on the cover. What's going on there? And she finds advertisements in magazines and stuff that there are fantasy worlds full of magic and magical beings with lots of violence and stuff. And so she looks into this, and she finds out that her son had been playing this weird new game that she's never heard of called Dungeons and Dragons. And according to her, this is disputed by some of her son's friends as well as me, because of the logistics don't make sense here. But according to her, she located a group of young men that played the game, so a bunch of teenagers that played Dungeons and Dragons. She asked them to join the group. She made up stories about a white. This is funny to me because at the time, Dungeons and Dragons is very much a teenage thing. Adults don't really jump into Dungeons and Dragons. So she makes up a story. I don't remember what she said. She makes up a story about why a woman in her mid-30s would want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Now, today in 2023, lots of people of all kinds of different age ranges play Dungeons and Dragons, and so it's kind of funny that she's in 1980s got to make up, why would a 30-year-old want to play Dungeons and Dragons? At the time of this recording, I'm 48, play Dungeons and Dragons every week. She also, and this is a logistics problem, and if you play Dungeons and Dragons, you're gonna pick up on this. She said that they played quote, we played for several hours a day every day for a month. Now, I'm a DM. I DM for a group of players every Sunday. We play for 2 hours. And we played for 2 hours every Sunday, 1 day a week, for a couple of years now. And that's really, really impressive to be able to have that group meet every Sunday for 2 hours on a regular basis. And we have weeks where somebody doesn't show up and we'll cancel, or we'll find something else to do or something like that. But to have a group of people that play several hours a day, every single day for a month, go and ask somebody that plays Dungeons and Dragons how hard it is to get a group of 4 to 5 people to meet once a week for a couple of hours. It's really, really difficult, especially as, just anytime. It's really, really hard. So that part of her story, to me as a Dungeons and Dragons player, as a DM, it doesn't hold any water at all. But anyway, that's a piddly thing to kind of argue with her thing. But according to Pulling, she was struck by the very occulty atmosphere. It was full of talk of devotion and loyalty, even love for the game. It's a great game. It's a lot of fun. She writes, quote, I began to feel like I was participating in some kind of cult. So here's where she starts going back down the a really, really sad, destroyed parent in a really bad situation. She starts going down, sort of a bad path, to me anyway. She sues the high school principal for $1 million. This is 1982. She sues the high school principal for $1 million. She also sues the company that produced Dungeons and Dragons. At the time, it was TSR, Tactical Studies Rules was the name of the company. Today, it's Wizards of the Coast. They bought Dungeons and Dragons, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe, probably more. She sued TSR for $10 million. Her lawsuits go nowhere, but here's the big thing. She forms a sort of a one-woman force called BAD. BAD is Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. It's a play off of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And so Patricia Pulling, starts this little organization called BAD. It's honestly kind of catchy, and I sort of like it, and I want to put that on my office door. So, big thing. She goes on all of the talk shows at the time. You might not recognize any of these names. One of them is still alive. I don't know about the other two. Phil Donahue's dead, though, I'm pretty sure. But Geraldo's still a television personality. She goes on Geraldo. She goes on Sally Jesse Raphael. She goes on Phil Donahue. She goes on CBS's 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes is currently still on the air. And a big thing on her 60 Minutes interview, and this is a mother that is not an academic, and she's definitely not a psychologist. So I'm not beating up on her for this. I feel like, because of her circumstances, I feel like she does deserve a heck of a lot of sympathy and a lot of understanding, even though she is attacking a game that I really love and that is absolutely innocuous. During her interview on 60 Minutes, the interviewer, I don't remember who it was, says, was your son well adjusted? And she says, quote, always. He never had any psychological problems. He was healthy. He might have been. My wife is a psychologist, and so I pick up a lot just, living with her and talking about, some psychological stuff. And she, unfortunately, probably has picked up a whole heck a lot of history stuff in her head that she's like, why do I know this? I'm not really interested. But we pick up each other's discipline stuff. And one of the big things is, again, her son's 16 years old. Schizophrenia kicks in during your late teens. If you're going to develop schizophrenia, sometimes people that develop schizophrenia, it kicks in your late teens and early 20s, somewhere in there. And so stuff is fine. You are a well-adjusted person. Everything is okay. Stuff's fine. And then it becomes not fine. There's just something that goes on. And it's really, really sad. And it's really, really scary. And I don't know if anybody diagnosed her son post-mortem or anything like that. But some of the stuff that he's throwing out there from lay John, John does not have academic training in psychology. It sounds like that's possibly what was happening. It could have not been, but it sounds like, again, not a psychologist, history guy. But that's possibly, it fits. So, religious evangelicals were absolutely magnetized to Patricia Pulling because, hey, this is a game where you do have different deities and you can follow these different deities and you can cast spells and things like that. And so, you could argue that there is, some religious iffiness maybe with D&D. So religious evangelicals flocked to her. They are going to help fund her lawsuits and her project. She was on projects. She was on the 700 Club. I don't know if the 700 Club's still on, but it was for the longest time. She was on the 700 Club multiple times. She's also joined by an expert, Dr. Thomas Radecki. If you want his name, it's Radecki. Radecki was a psychiatrist. He is a psychiatrist. He's still alive as of this recording. He's a psychiatrist. He was the chairman of the National Coalition on Television Violence. So he's looking at television programs and arguing that all of these violent TV shows and things are one of the big causes of youth violence. And Radecki says, quote, Dungeons and Dragons is essentially the worship of violence. The game is full of human sacrifice, eating babies, drinking blood, rape, murder of every variety, curses of insanity. It's just a very violent game. Later, Radecki says, quote, kids are getting murdered because of this game. I want to take this apart. There's violence in Dungeons and Dragons. It's a medieval sort of world, and you can play and avoid any kind of combat. We ran a campaign somewhat recently. I can't remember what it's called now, but it was Into the Feywild, and it was a carnival, and I'm going to remember as soon as I finish up this video. But one of the big themes in that campaign is you can play through the entire campaign without resorting to violence, and that's kind of a little bit unique in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. So it does have violence. You can solve issues with violence and engage in combat. You can also talk your way out of violence. My group that I play with, that I DM for, they actually try to talk their way out of situations a lot rather than resorting to violence. I sometimes have to push them into violence occasionally, and that sounds really weird. So it is a violent tabletop game, full of human sacrifice. I have played for a while back in the 1980s. I played again in the early 90s, and we've started this group, I don't know, late 2018, and then this other group that I DM for started meeting after that. I don't remember ever sacrificing a human. I don't remember ever sacrificing any being to a god or anything like that. I don't remember. Eating babies. No. I mean, I guess you could, but we've never done it at my table. Drinking blood. Have had that. Two of my players in different campaigns have played vampires, and that's what they do. So, kind of, yeah. Rape, nope. No sex at my table, sorry. Murder of every variety, yeah, okay. Curses of insanity, I've put curses on people as the DM. And it is, again, a violent game. So, TSR, the maker of Dungeons & Dragons, publisher of Dungeons & Dragons, hired a Dr. Joyce Brothers. She was a psychologist. She called the game Dungeons & Dragons very wonderful. She said it was cooperative and not competitive, and that's one of the big things. If you've ever played D&D, you're at a table with a group of people, and you all have the same goal. You could look at it as the DM as adversarial because I'm on the other side, but my goal, honestly, don't tell my players this, my goal is that we all have fun, and I do want them to succeed at their goal. I will challenge them, and sometimes I will kill their characters. That sounds weird to laugh about that. But yeah, it's cooperative storytelling. I want everybody to have fun at my table. And she says, and this is a big thing, the way I look at it too, the real appeal of the game is that it allows players to create freely. You know, I throw a situation out there and you play it. and we see how you react to it. Pulling also gave seminars to law enforcement. She became an occult expert, and so she was telling cops different issues to watch for that were evil clues somehow when they were when they were investigating teenage deaths and all this stuff. Yeah, unfortunately, really, really sadly, it looks like Patricia Pulling's son developed some kind of late teen, early adult mental instability, and he might not have, but the whole hearing voices and telling him to kill somebody is a thing. And nobody, sadly, nobody picked up on that. He was throwing stuff out there occasionally, and nobody picked up on it. One of his teachers said that on the last exam that she gave him, "This is the last paper I will ever write. Goodbye." He's a junior. He's got another year of high school. You know, that teacher should have, hey, what's up with this statement, maybe? Let's talk about that. He had been overheard telling a different teacher, "Don't bother to grade my exam because it won't be necessary after 7 o'clock. Hold up, man. What do you mean by that? You gotta ask people this kind of stuff. It's uncomfortable as heck, but you gotta step up, you know. And so this whole story, sadly, a mom lost her son, and she was reaching for something to blame, you know. And ultimately, D&D is a harmless game. It actually brings people together. During the pandemic, it was wonderful because a whole lot of people could play online and get a lot of social contact and stuff. You know, and unfortunately, Miss Pulling just kind of, she needed something to grab onto, and that's what she ran with. So I feel pretty bad for her. You know, even though she's attacking this game that I really, really love, and it's been wonderful in my life, and you know, made me some friends. I feel bad for Patricia. Now, Dr. Reddicky, though, absolutely not. No feeling sorry for him. 1992, Reddicky had his medical license revoked because he was coercing female patients into having sex. Here's Mr. Morality here attacking Dungeons and Dragons, and he's coercing female patients to having sex. He later on went on to run a rehab center, and he was found in 2016, not very long ago. 2016, he was trading opioids for sex. So Dr. Reddicky is a sexual predator, and he was sentenced to prison, and he's expected to be in prison until he dies. We also just kind of, these are interesting. Sometimes you see these tracts that folks leave around. This is a common one that I've seen. This was your life. They're trying to get you to convert to Christianity, and that's fine. That's totally cool. A guy named Jack Chick wrote a lot of these tracts, and one of them he wrote was called Dark Dungeons. This particular tract, if you can get an original copy from the 1980s, is actually a collector's item, and they go for big money on eBay. And it's got a young lady that starts playing Dungeons and Dragons. I think the dark-haired lady there is her teacher that recruits her to playing Dungeons and Dragons, and she is getting her student to actually cast spells and stuff like that. And at the end of the track, she swears off Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. So fun and weird stuff. Last thing we are gonna to jump into, because this video is getting a little bit long. We have a similar freak out over music. Some of the early music in the early 1980s had some very occult themes to it. And this is just bands looking for a niche to sell records and perform cool music. Alice Cooper has a lot of occult imagery and a lot of occult sort of sounding stuff in his songs. He's been around for about 10 years at this point. Ozzy Osbourne, same thing, has been around for about 10, 15 years at this point. More and more heavy metal bands start picking up on that genre and that imagery, and become more and more popular. And older people freak out about this and claim that heavy metal is the devil's music kind of stuff. And it works. It works to appeal to young people that this is sort of, defiant, irreverent kind of music. Motley Crue had a pentagram on quite a few of their albums. And one of their albums is called Shout at the Devil. Ozzy is the Prince of Darkness. He had a song named Suicide Solution. He gets sued for this because someone argued that their kid committed suicide because of the song. The song's about alcohol. And it's about one of Ozzy's friends that drank himself to death, and he's voicing that pain, and this is not a solution. AC/DC, several songs that have some kind of occultish stuff, Highway to Hell, Hell's Bells, and so there's this claim that Satanism is everywhere. There's also allegations that some of heavy metal music, some other music, the Eagles are accused of this or of having subliminal messages in their songs. Nobody does. But enter a group called the Washington Wives. This is a nonpartisan group. You've got Republican spouses in Congress, and you've got Democrat spouses in Congress. This is headed up by the wife of Al Gore. He's a Democrat, Tipper Gore. She heads up the Washington Wives on investigating the harmful effects of all of this racy kind of music. And they form a group called the Parents Music Resource Center. And they create a list of the absolutely worst songs that are out there at the time. And these songs are called collectively the Filthy 15. Some of them you'll listen to and you're like, okay. Some of them are quite racy, maybe. But most of them are don't really have, I don't know, not much. Cyndi Lauper's on here. Okay. Cyndi Lauper. Anyway, so they create this list called the Filthy 15. They have congressional hearings, and a big thing, the music industry itself decides to police itself, much like we saw with the Comics Code Authority. The music industry itself decides to police itself rather than getting Congress involved in oversight. And so they start to decide to put this parental advisory explicit content sticker on music, on albums that have, language, possibly, some violence. I don't remember if I ever saw this on records that had songs that spoke to violence or anything. But these are kind of sort of nicknamed tipper stickers. I personally, I was, teenager when this came out, when the parental advisory explicit content came out. I actually bought a couple of records just because they had the sticker on there. Didn't know who the band was. Bought the record because it had the sticker on it. And several of those bands that I didn't know who they were and I just bought the record, I didn't really like the album. I don't remember who they were, but it wasn't really my thing. I did buy other albums that I knew the band that had the sticker. It wasn't because, of the explicit content. It's just I didn't like their music. But other bands that had the stickers, I bought those, but I was going to buy that album anyway. I've talked to people in the music industry, and they actually they knew that kids like me were going to buy these albums because of the sticker. And some bands actually started putting some cuss words into their songs that weren't there originally, so that they could get the sticker onto their albums because it would drive up sales. And so you know, this kind of died down. I don't know if I've seen any parental advisory stickers on any albums lately. You don't see albums anymore though. That everything is digital, which is cool, but I kind of miss going to the record store and looking through the albums. This dies down somewhat, and then the mid '90s, the late '90s, we'll freak out over music again because of gangster rap. Gangster rap kind of emerges as a more of a tougher rap, hardcore genre, and people freak out over that. And so we'll always freak out over music, and we'll always freak out over books and games and all kinds of stuff. Just stop doing that. But we'll stop here because we are getting a little bit long winded here. So thank you, and we'll talk at you later.